Tonight, an attack on international travellers at Moscow's major airport kills at least 35 people and leaves 170 wounded. 2 Britons are among the dead. Can the outside world any longer ignore Russia's private war with Islamic militants? We'll be discussing the conflict in the North Caucasus that Moscow cannot seem to stamp out. Good evening. The Russian authorities have tonight confirmed that 2 Britons are amongst the fatalities after the suicide attack on Moscow's busiest airport. The blast appears to have been designed to hit international passengers and coincided with Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev's planned departure to the Davos Economic Summit to try to drum up foreign investment in an election year. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack, but the expectation is that it's the work of an Islamic insurgency in the North Caucasus that's plagued the Russian leadership for more than a decade. Richard Watson's here. Richard, what's the latest?
Well, the latest is that they're saying that at least 35 are dead, dozens injured. They haven't put an actual figure on that at the moment. There could be many more dead, that hasn't been confirmed as of yet. The 2 Britons, as you say, have been confirmed late tonight within the last 90 minutes, but no further detail so far. Some very interesting and disturbing footage, I have to say, emerged tonight, actually, which appears to be taken on a mobile phone, and it actually shows the arrival hall minutes after the attack. These were the scenes minutes after the blast this afternoon. A small fire burned, bodies strewn on the ground. The terrorists struck at a symbolic target here, Moscow's main airport served by international airlines, including British Airways. 2 flights from the UK had recently landed. Some passengers had passed through the baggage hall minutes before the blast.
There was this almighty explosion, or this huge bang. My colleague and I to each other and said, Christ, that sounds like a car bomb or something, because the noise was literally, it shook you.
We could see, confused people moving around. We could see clouds and clouds of dust coming out from that area.
The Russian government has already said this was a terrorist attack, with suspicion falling on Islamist extremists from Russia's troubled southern border.
So the suspicion is that it's Islamist, but do we have any more information?
Well, the North Caucasus region has been a huge source of instability for Russia since the Soviet days. I mean, for years the main focus was Chechnya, but an aggressive security clampdown there has resulted in extremist cells moving to neighbouring Dagestan and Ingushetia. Now, Islamist extremists from all these areas have been responsible for thousands of deaths, to name just a few. In 2002, a Chechen warlord took hostages at a theatre in Moscow. A botched rescue attempt contributed to a huge death toll. 129 were killed. In 2004, Chechen rebels took over control of a school in Beslan on the first day of term. Another rescue attempt was made. 331 people were killed, including 186 children. Last year, rebels linked to extremists from Dagestan attacked a metro station in Moscow and 40 were killed when 2 female suicide bombers blew themselves up.
These are the ones we know about, but the assumption is that a lot of incidents go unreported. Yeah,
absolutely right. I mean, we in the West don't really hear about a lot of these incidents. Many more attacks go unreported here. Russian figures suggest a 400% increase in the North Caucasus last year. There were 18 suicide bombings alone. There were some 30 counter-terrorism police operations. 1,200 kilos of explosives were recovered. And some 300 militants were eliminated, to use the Russian term, including 30 leaders, it's claimed. Now, this is evidence of an increasingly brutal security clampdown.
But the idea that Islamists are synonymous with Al-Qaeda is just too simplistic a notion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's too early to say whether this is Al-Qaeda linked or not, but it seems unlikely. I mean, they are 2 distinct different bodies. The actual conflict in the North Caucasus region really is dominated by a regional conflict. There's no absolute motivation for Al-Qaeda to get involved. Of course, at one time, this Chechnyan conflict was a great draw for British extremists and European extremists to go and volunteer to fight out there. That was in the late 1990s. Now it seems to be more of a regional conflict against the Russian state. So I think really it's probably regional actors that would be looked at. But it has to be said, it's a huge blow to the Russian government, this.
Richard, thank you. Well, I'm joined now from Moscow by a former advisor to the Kremlin, Nikolai Petrov, and here in the studio by Oksana Antonenko, director of the Russian programme for the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Nikolai Petrov, the analysis that it is most likely to be insurgents from the North Caucasus, does that accord with your view?
Well, it seems to me that anyway it's connected to Northern Caucasus, regardless of the fact who exactly was suicide bomber. Even if it was ethnic Russian, it's quite understandable that Northern Caucasus is direct and indirect reason for all we've seen today.
And if if the government has managed to clamp down on what's happened in Chechnya, they've simply exported the problem to Dagestan and Ingushetia. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, what we saw recently, it was expansion of terrorism, although situation in Chechnya is somehow controlled, not by Moscow, but by regional leader. But now the whole Northern Caucasus is target of numerous terrorist attacks.
Do you think, Osana, that the move to an international target, essentially an arrivals hall for an international airport, it's a significant departure?
Well, it is a significant departure because this is the first time we have actually seen a terrorist attack targeting potentially some foreigners. But of course, it is also a gamble for those groupings because the last time we have seen a more internationalization of these attacks, it actually served only, against their cause. So I think that's really not clear why are they taking that to target foreigners.
Well, is it either a sign of desperation or a sign that they think they're getting the upper hand because, in fact, after a decade, they're still operational?
Well, when they say they, we kind of presuppose that this is an organized force. But what actually happened in the North Caucasus, that after the war in Chechnya, when we had a real nationalist movement that was well organized, we now have a splintering of all these violent groups that are driven oftentimes by very small groupings, oftentimes very young people, young Jamaats, who are not really organized at all.
And how do you think, Nikolai Petrov, the Kremlin will respond to this?
Well, until now there was a pretty understandable response to almost all large-scale terrorist attacks. The first move was to give secret services more resources, and the second was to put more political pressure, like after 2004 attack in Beslan.
But if you look at the genesis of this, as we've just been hearing in the studio, it's a number of disparate groups. Do you think there was a trigger? Was there a particular capture of a leader? Was there something like what happened with the metro that seemed to trigger something that the Kremlin could actually point to?
Well, I would say that the reason why the Kremlin is not capable now to control what's going on with these small units is partly connected to the relative success of the war in Northern Caucasus. And now it's needed, to my mind, it's needed to revise the whole concept. It's understandable that those approaches which are practiced by the Kremlin no more work.
So we're in a situation now where, the global economy and so forth, the amount of companies operating in Russia and so forth. I mean, David Cameron has said that he stands shoulder to shoulder with Russia, but can there be any useful, meaningful response from the West, or is this Russia's problem?
Well, I think it is very interesting that President Medvedev was actually on his way to Davos, where he was supposed to launch a major investment program for the North Caucasus. That was one of his major agenda items. He was hoping for international investment, believe it or not, to develop the skiing resorts all across Chechnya and the North Caucasus.
Yeah.
No, they're not for Winter Olympics. They're more for the Northern Caucasus, because, of course, Winter Olympics are in Sochi, a different part of the region. And we also are now seeing more of the attention from the European Union wanting to provide more assistance. European Union and the World Bank are already providing assistance. But I totally agree with Nikolai that it's not actually about money and investment. It is all about the policy. How do you actually craft a policy which could make those new people that are taking violence up to feel that they belong, to feel that they have opportunities, to feel that government represents their interests?
So it would be in the Kremlin's own interest perhaps to have a more positive engagement in the Caucasus. I mean, I suppose, as economically the Kremlin's trying to do. Nikolai.
Well, I would say that the year ago there was, totally new approach practiced there, and it can be described as more business, financial approach to it. Chechnya and the rest of ethnic republics in the region, and it didn't work. And partly it's due to the problem that in order to start any business development, you should somehow to pacify the territory. Partly it's due to the fact that the environment there is not very friendly to any investments, and corruption is huge. Political authorities are very archaic, and in order to fix the situation, you should invest a lot of efforts, not only financial resources.
Thank you both very much.